I'll find out from Anita in a few minutes if she has the same take on it that I have held for some time, and that is communism never went away. Nazism never went away. It is still alive and well. It has just changed forms. Okay? Let me tell you a little bit about her. She is a parent advocate, education researcher, national speaker, expert witness for a Supreme Court case in Ohio, expert witness for the Department of the Interior, National Infrastructure, Health and Education Data Security hearing, expert witness against the medicalization of schools about Hillary Care, invited speaker to Stanford University, Conference on Computers, Freedom and Privacy, 1995 this goes back to. Filed a federal complaint against the Pennsylvania Department of Education and forced the department to withdraw the controversial test, the EQA, Educational Quality Assessment, a prototype for the national assessment. She is writer and author of articles about Common Core, the nationalization of education, choice, charter schools, and testing. This is going to get good. Without further ado, welcome to Caravan to Midnight, Anita Hogue. Thanks for making the time for us. Great to meet you and great to have you here.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate being able to talk to you today about these issues.
You know, you and I were just chatting before we got going here, and I said, wow, you've been at this for some time. So just tell us, this is very intense work, especially all this expert witness over and over and over again. Wow.
It is intense work, and basically started out just as a parent involved in their education with their children. And my son had come home one day when he was in the 8th grade, and this is a long time ago. And he said, Mom, there was a test that was given at school, and it was really weird because you couldn't answer the questions. And he was a very bright student and really wanted to make all A's and do everything absolutely correct. And he was actually stumped. So I said, well, like, what type of questions were on the test? And he said that the principal had taken them down to a little assembly and explained what the test was, and said one of the sample questions was, if you saw an old lady standing on the side of the street, what would you do? A, push her in the street, or B, throw rocks at her?
Wow.
So I became a little alarmed. I was pretty much involved in the education of my children. I thought at the time I was writing a grant for the school district at the time for the artist in education. So I went to see the superintendent and I said, I really want to see this test that my son had taken. Well, she picked up a book and threw it across the room and she said, you and I aren't going to be friends anymore. And I said, well, I really don't care about that. I want to see this test. And this is where my whole journey began. It was about a year or so before I could really get access. I was going through my local district. I went through the state requesting to see this test, and I was denied access. So finally, I had contact with one of the aides in my representative's office. It was a state representative. And they sent me these documents that had what they called the quality goals of education in Pennsylvania. And they were all in, I'm going to explain this, the affective domain. The affective domain is the testing of attitudes, values, opinions, dispositions, and beliefs of children. So I actually, at that time, filed a federal complaint against the Pennsylvania Department of Ed because it was state administered. It was a state assessment that was given to every 5, 8th, and 11th grades every year. So it was, a very long journey, but in the end, I could prove that not only was the Pennsylvania Department of Ed testing 350 questions on attitudes, values, opinions, and beliefs, 30 questions in reading, 30 questions in math, and we were the model for the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP, they call it. What I did at that time was freedom of information, my own complaint. So what I received back was all of the documents that the state had to give to prove that they weren't, which of course I then got the test, I got the scoring, and yes, the federal government is scoring attitudes, values, and opinions and beliefs of children. In 1990, the Pennsylvania Department of Ed had to withdraw the test. They also issued a policy in Pennsylvania saying that they would never do it again. So it was called Basic Education Circular 8-90. So this is basically where my whole entire journey began. In the meantime, there were different people who had contacted me about what I had been doing. And one was Charlotte Iserbeet, and I know that you've had Charlotte on your show, who was at that time had just been fired from the federal Department of Ed. And she called me and I told her that this whole entire agenda was revolving around the federal legislation called Title I. Title I supposedly was to be grants that were given to different schools for children who were quote unquote in poverty. Okay, poor children were to get these Title I grants. What I had found out was the definition really for Title I was not poor children. It was any child who was educationally deprived. So a child was educationally deprived if they weren't meeting some of the government's objectives or their outcomes in education. So whenever I told Charlotte about this, she got on a plane and flew to Pennsylvania to meet with me because she knew that I had uncovered the actual meat of what was actually happening in this country. And it was so very deceptive. Okay. Also in these documents that I had freedom of information, it said that you wouldn't tell the community or the parents about the testing depending upon the sophistication of your school district. They just really crossed the wrong person because, I immediately jumped on this situation because I realized what was really happening. It was so deceptive, you wouldn't believe it, John. For instance, they would say, don't you want your children to have good citizenship? Don't you want them to have honesty and integrity? Right? Don't you want them to cooperate with others? Don't you want them to be a good citizen?
Absolutely.
Okay. So when I found the evaluation for citizenship, they were testing thresholds of compliance by reward and punishment. It was a total B.F. Skinner model that I can prove. And they were scoring attitudes, values, opinions, dispositions, personalities of children. So this was the beginning of my journey, and I felt betrayed. I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone because you're reading these papers that say for self-esteem, they were going to test whether the child was internally influenced or externally influenced. And it was all scored toward collectivism.
You bet.
The whole entire test was scored toward collectivism. So when I found the scoring, they would give children hypothetical situations, little stories. So one of the questions was, there's a club called the Midnight Artist. They go out late at night and paint funny sayings on buildings. You would join the club when you knew, number one, your best friend asked you to join. The whole entire test is geared toward willingness to comply, willingness to go along with the group. In that particular question, would you join the club? You got 1 point for yes. You got 0 for no. So if you said you would not go out and vandalize, that was a behavioral weakness. you got a zero. Zero. They wanted you to comply with the group. Now, because it's reward and punishment, the last question in that little scenario was, well, the second one was, if all of the people in all of your friends would join, would you join? Again, collectivism, going along with the group. You got 1 point if you did it. So the last one, it really confused me for a while because I'm looking at the scoring. And the last question was, your parents would ground you if they found out that you joined or that you did this. Well, the state desired response was no. And I thought, well, why? Okay, if this is geared toward collectivism, why would the federal government want you to obey your parents, right? But that's not what they were looking for. What they were looking for was, would you obey authority? If punishment is incurred, will you obey? Will you comply? So the whole entire system is based on B.F. Skinner, reward and punishment, and going along with the group, willingness to obey. And I have all this in writing from the contracts, of course. So, but anyway, this was my journey. Okay, so John, I'm sitting here thinking, they're scoring these tests. What on earth are they doing with the data? And that got me involved in looking more into the databases of how the government was collecting the information on families and students, what they were doing with the information, using it for scientific research to create curriculum to target certain population groups. Okay, so at the beginning of the test, they would ask all of this information. How many books in your home? How much does your father make? Do you have a computer in your home? How many books in your home? All of this information. So they were creating what is called a psychographic.
You bet.
You have a psychographic based on all of this information, your socioeconomic status, where you went to college, if you did go to college, and created a target population for specific curriculum. So at that time, you have to understand, the curriculum being placed in the different schools was helter-skelter, right? Some teachers wouldn't do it, some school districts wouldn't do it. So you had just pockets of experimentation. Okay, my school district happened to be one of them. So then I began this journey, and with Charlotte and other researchers across the whole entire country, to research and expose what was going on in our schools. And yes, I have been doing this a long time, since the early 1990s. And it's been an incredible journey. But what we have found out of that is the base of what is changing not only education, but how it will affect eventually how it will change representative government in our country. And I do want to say this one thing, that when thinking about the violations of privacy that were exposed by Edward Snowden and the NSA monitoring emails and phones, I believe that was a test. That was a test to see how this country would react to collecting this personal information. Because trust me, Snowden's release of this information is child's play compared to what the federal government is collecting on your children and on your family.
It's okay.
I believe that it was a test to see how the United States people would react to violations of privacy. Did you see millions of people marching on DC after that?
No.
You had people who were upset, right?
Yeah,
people were upset, but what did they do?
Nothing.
Nothing. Talking about not only the census, okay, which is the demographic information that the government already collects.
Yes.
That now they're going to collect psychometric information. Okay, psychometric information includes psychological information, information on attitudes, values, dispositions of people, and this is going to be used as the census. We have documents that state that all of this information that is being collected on the local level, in your local school, on your children, on your families, is being sent to the federal government, and they are creating psychometric dossiers on every person in the United States. And Pennsylvania
Psychometric.
was a model.
What's that?
Pennsylvania was a model.
Pennsylvania was the model. Psychometric. What?
Psychometric. That means, again, oh, and it also includes biometric information, okay? Fingerprints, iris scans, DNA sequences, all of this is included on a file. And I want to get into this a little bit later. Grants that we have secured from the Pennsylvania Department of Ed and the National Center of Education Statistics. This is the big department in our federal government, in the Department of Ed, that collects all the data on all of our children and families. It's the Department of Education that has created this census. Okay, it's not the Department of Welfare, it's not anywhere else, it's not the Department of Interior, it's the Department of Education that has the contracts to collect information in every state. The contracts are called State Longitudinal Data Systems. And actually, this past Christmas, I gave a gift to the nation. I gave them each the link to their longitudinal data system that shows them how their state created a unique ID. And in Pennsylvania, when we were the model for this particular aspect of data collection, they said that this was a unique national ID that we have created in the Department of Education for every person in the United States. P, which means prenatal, okay?
Nice.
Through retirement, birth to workplace.
Who decided this was a good idea? I mean,
This is actually brutal because a lot of people will say to me, Anita, you know what? The government collects a lot of information. Who cares? They have it anyway, right? But this system, like you say, is a decision-making model.
you bet.
Right? So it's a total quality management system of accountability. Okay. So what that means is if your child doesn't pass the test in the 3rd grade, they will not move on. In the 8th grade, the government will decide your career. Okay. It's called a career pathway. And if you don't meet the government objectives in these tests, you will not graduate from high school.
And then what becomes of you if you don't graduate from high school?
Well, that's a good question. What happens if you don't graduate? You will stay there until you meet the objectives.
You will stay there.
You will not get a diploma. You will not graduate. You will not do anything. You will not get a job. This whole entire agenda was laid out in 1992 in the Department of Labor. It was called the SCANS, the Secretary's Commission for Achieving Necessary Skills. I have the book. I'll show it to you. This is it.
Learning a Living, a Blueprint for High Performance, a SCANS report for America 2000. And that's the Secretary's Commission on Achieving Necessary Skills, U.S. Department of Labor, April 1992.
That's it.
Sick.
1992, they laid out a plan that said every child had to meet specific criteria. Okay, they also laid out the plan that this whole entire agenda was put in place for business, okay? And they also created, this is good because I can show you this stuff.
I love it.
This is the resume.
Hypothetical resume.
It's a hypothetical resume from the Department of Labor. And if you look, let's see, you see over here these proficiency levels?
Yeah, I was looking right at it. Yeah.
Okay, and they have interpersonal skills. Here they are over here.
Yes.
Interpersonal skills with a proficiency level. Then down here, they have all the personal qualities. Let's look at them. Responsibility, self-esteem, sociability, self-management, integrity, and honesty. With ratings and proficiency levels. This is from the Department of Labor, and this is your prototype. Okay? What I want people to think about when you have a standard that is in the affective domain. Remember, affective domain is attitudes, values, and dispositions.
Okay.
So the first question you have to ask yourself, how do you measure honesty? How much is too much and how much is not enough in order to graduate? Okay. How do you score it? Who is creating the standard for honesty and integrity? How do you score honesty? How do you score interpersonal skills? And okay, the third thing you have to think about is, what are they doing with the information when they get it?
Yeah.
Okay. The next part, how do you remediate my child?
Ugh.
Okay, what are you doing? Okay, if this is going to be classes in the school, and this is going to be your standard, what are you going to do to my child? Okay, and the last one is, what if the parent and the state disagree? What happens? Okay, so these are the most important things to think about, because the whole entire agenda is mental health. The whole entire agenda. So if you listen to Charlotte Iserbyt in the past, what did she say? The dumbing down of America. That's the B.F. Skinner part. In this SCANS book, it says two most important things that we have to do. Number one, functional literacy. In their words, not mine. Functional literacy. Well, how do we create functional literacy across the board on everyone? It's B.F. Skinner, operant conditioning, okay? It's just like if you get a dog, okay, and you're training a dog to sit, to lay down, and you give him treats, and he's getting pretty good at it. This is operant conditioning, okay?
Yeah.
If you ask that dog to roll over, and he has never been taught that, he'll just stare and look at you.
Right.
This is what we're getting from our kids now. The stare and look at you. Okay, they have an opinion. But see, the whole idea of operant conditioning is to control literacy. But the other part is you have to have the right attitude, okay? You have to have the right value. It has to be collectivism. So you have functional literacy and mental health. So what did Obama do in January? No, well, January he did babies. Now, this is about a year ago. A year ago, after the Sandy Hook agenda, they had come out and said, we're going to give all this money for not only gun violence, but mental health.
Yeah.
The whole agenda was mental health. Billions and billions of dollars are being siphoned into education for mental health re-education.
And the attendant drugs that will address any of what the state considers to be aberration in psychological development and the resultant behaviors.
Absolutely. Are you born a natural born killer? Okay. Are we going to get into DNA? Okay. So what are we actually talking about when we say that a child may be born, and if they test their DNA according to what the government criteria is, and they have some sort of a recessive aggressive gene, what are they going to do to the child? Or something, or drugs, or re-educated, or whatever.
Or lobotomy.
So, but this is the decision-making model, okay? Mm-hmm. Whatever the government criteria is the next step of how they will create interventions, create compliance. What happened to me? Okay, so, I got really involved. I actually led a delegation down to the National Center of Education Statistics and had meetings with a commissioner, Emerson Elliott. And there were quite a few different states that had representatives that had come with me to ask him questions, okay? So we asked him questions about the database. We asked him questions about our past state assessment that was measuring all of these mental health criteria and how it was scored. We asked him if they still had the data. He said yes. I asked him if this was ever going to be a longitudinal study, which means a study on every person in the future. You know what he said? I can't tell you what we're going to do in the future. So we had papers saying what they were going to do. We had the scans book saying what they were going to do, but we couldn't prove it.
Right.
All we had was paper. John, now I can prove it. I can prove everything that I'm saying because I have all the contracts. I have everything that the government is doing, and I can prove it in the classroom. So where Charlotte is coming from the top down, how everything happened from all of the different things that were happening with treaties and the agreements between the United States and the Soviet Union, I was the person who started in the classroom with my child. And I worked up to where Charlotte was. And when we met, it was dynamite because we had all the documentation that we needed to prove that it was happening. So what was happening now? What happened that put me over the edge? Okay, there were three things that happened in this administration, actually, that totally changed from what was on paper to what was being implemented.
You say this administration, which one? The current one?
This administration, which of course is the Obama administration.
Ugh.
There were many things that happened before. I mean, No Child Left Behind was passed by the Bush administration. So you had the Clinton administration with America 2000, and he was head of the National Governors Association when this was a prototype and was introduced at that time. So every president, and it doesn't matter if they were Democratic or Republican, this agenda has moved forward. There was no doubt about it. Okay? But right now is the implementation phase. Okay? All along, we have the experimentation. We have the experimentation in poor and minority schools and in poor cities, rural areas like the McGuffey School District where I was from. So now what has happened under this administration? The first thing that happened was the Common Core. Well, what is the Common Core? The Common Core is no different from Obamacare. It's an individual mandate to individual students who have to meet federal outcomes. And that's what it was. It was a shift in power. It was a shift in power and a strategy for all 50 states to be standardized. Okay, so every state who accepted Common Core has the exact same data elements for computer data collection. And that's what Common Core is. The transfer of power from your local district having control of the curriculum and control over what the teachers would teach, and the teachers having control of their own standards and what they thought was best for children, that has been removed. It has now been removed to the federal level. So you have these Common Core standards that were initiated by the chief state school officers. That's every Secretary of Ed in the whole country, and the National Governors Association. And that was really pretty tricky. You know why? Because the federal government says in law everywhere, in the General Education Provisions Act, that the federal government cannot direct or supervise curriculum. Okay? So what did they do?
There have been a couple of references to B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner was an American psychologist best known for his influence on behaviorism. Skinner referred to his own philosophy as radical behaviorism and suggested that the concept of free will was simply an illusion. All human action, he instead believed, was the direct result of conditioning. In this operant conditioning process, actions that are followed by good consequences are reinforced, and therefore those behaviors are more likely to occur again in the future. Behaviors that result in negative consequences, on the other hand, become less likely to occur again. Among his many discoveries, inventions, and accomplishments were the creation of the operant conditioning chamber, also known as the Skinner box, his research on schedules of reinforcement, the introduction of response rates as a dependent variable in research, and the creation of the cumulative recorder to track these response rates. In one survey, Skinner was named the most influential psychologist of the 20th century.
Good deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to Common Core was a 50-state strategy.
Yep.
Okay. In order to have a 50-state strategy, you have to have standardization. You have to have every state be the same. You have to have the data elements the same. You have to have a micro record. It has to be on an individual. So the second thing that was absolutely needed for compliance on individuals was an executive order by the president to change the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, which is FERPA. Okay, so you had to change FERPA that used to protect children and families, that now he calls it unlocking the data, so third-party contractors can access personally identifiable information on children, including biometric data. Okay, so everything is up for grabs in education. So you have all the psychological data being collected. You now have more information on biometrics that are being done. Children, how they, with the computers, they are able to see, does a child look frustrated when they're doing something? How is their eye contact?
Oh, no.
Are they emotional while they do a test? So all of this information is being collected. And of course, the definition of personally identifiable information, and I have it here. I want to read it to you. This is according to federal law under FERPA, Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. So personally identifiable information is a student's name, their parents, family members, address, which would include zip code, blah, 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 birth date, personal identifiers. Okay, so when they include a social security number or a student number or biometric record, the definition of biometric record is a record of one or more measurable biological or behavioral characteristics that can be used for automated recognition of an individual. Examples are fingerprints, retina, iris scans, iris patterns, voice prints, DNA sequences, facial characteristics, and handwriting. This is now all allowed to be shared without parental consent, disclosure to school officials. So the definition of school official is, get this, a contractor, a consultant, a volunteer, or any other party to whom an agency or institution has outsourced services or functions are considered a school official. So when that happened in FERPA, I went berserk. I've written quite a few articles on unlocking the data. I've been trying to expose this, and it's been a very difficult way to try to explain, because it's a little technical, but people need to understand that this information is being collected. So what did Obama do after he unlocked the data? He allowed the National Center of Education Statistics to do grants to every state, and I mean every state. Every state has a grant for a state longitudinal data system that sets up a national ID for every person, birth through the workplace. And we have these grants. So not only is this a womb to work place, it connects all of the different other agencies. Health and Human Services, the Department of Labor to collect wages. Of course, you realize once they take that step to collect information on wages, they're collecting information on human capital, okay? What is your worth to the economy? And then, of course, the third thing that he did was grant, well, actually, Secretary of Education Arne Duncan did this. They took the Title I, okay? This was the original poverty guidelines under the Johnson administration called ESA, Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And he allowed waivers. So now we have waivers from the federal government to all of this money being given to the different states. And this money now allows and blankets Common Core. Let me explain how this was done. So this waiver is given, for example, to the state of Pennsylvania and all the other different states. And what it says in the waiver is that you no longer have to have 40% of free and reduced lunch. Okay, and that's how Title I was done before. So if you have Title I children, they get free and reduced lunch. This is how they get the free breakfast and the free lunch at school. And they also get remediation, usually in reading.
Yep.
So what Secretary Duncan did in his waiver, he lowered the 40% to 0. What does that mean?
I don't know.
Common Core blankets a whole entire school and captures every child under Common Core.
Perfect.
So every child is at risk. Every child is educationally deprived. Every child in the United States, because they have to meet the Common Core standards.
Terrible.
This is the agenda, okay? And it's massive. It's a massive agenda. And if you look very closely at all of the different aspects that are coming together, it's just mind-boggling. The way that the system is working, the way that this waiver is working, it expands what a child is as if they are at risk. It includes all the mental health agenda. It includes interventions. It includes identification. It includes the National Center of Education Statistics monitoring every child. So let me take you on to my next journey.
You just do that. You just take us with you.
I'll try to take you along because I'm trying to make it as easy for people to understand, because this has taken me 20 years and I'm trying to tell people what have happened in just a couple hours. Okay, so when FERPA changed, okay, Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, because of President Obama's executive order, I had been, of course, writing these different articles about how privacy was dead in the United States because of what had happened. So I had been contacted by a few people in Pennsylvania that said, explain to me what this FERPA is all about, because a couple legislators in Pennsylvania had written a bill saying that they were going to protect the privacy of Pennsylvania children. Okay, the name of the executive order is, the number is 12866 if anyone wants to look it up. We have the executive order. So this executive order allowed the National Center of Education Statistics, okay, that's your data collection agenda a group in Washington, D.C., to give this grant to every state. Okay, so I'm having this meeting with these representatives in Harrisburg, and I tell them that this isn't personal, but let me show you why your bill is so bad. And I walked them through all of the guidelines in FERPA and how it was changed, and showed them how personally identifiable information was being given out for free to all these outside contractors to create curriculum, to do whatever, okay? Now we have a business, we have a wealth management business here in south of Pittsburgh, and if we want to do marketing and we want to buy a list, you know how expensive that is, okay?
Sure.
These groups are getting this data for free, okay? So I had written a prototype of a letter of what to ask for because I had all the templates, and I have all the templates for many other states also, of what they call their written agreements that allow them to give away personally identifiable information to these third-party vendors. And he says to me, "Are you going to write the letter?" And I said, "No, you are." So he did agree. He agreed to write the letter. He had 6 other representatives put their name on it. We requested all of these contracts. He received them. And what was interesting, he said to me, "What if we request all this information and we just get milk toast?" And I said, "Trust me, the whole room is going to be filled with documents." Okay, so he calls me. He got the letter back from the Secretary of Ed. All of the documents were given to him on a flash drive. There was so many documents, they had to put it on a flash drive to give it to him.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, 1 week later, this representative just kind of disappeared, okay? Would not talk to us, would not give us the information, would not do anything. He would not answer our calls, nothing, okay? So we had to go an alternate route. I was determined I was going to get these contracts. We had the letter that said who the contracts were with, but we needed the actual documentation. So then we decided to go to the chairman of the Senate Education Committee, and this is so much fun, okay? Because they really don't know what they're doing, okay? Most of these representatives don't know what they're doing, okay?
I agree with you.
He requests the information. We get the flash drive. Well, it took me about 2 months to go through all of the information. When I gathered all the information, we set up a meeting in his office, which was at October 20th of just this past year. So we set up this meeting. We had other representatives. We had his aide. We had someone from the governor's office. We had several different parents in our group. When I arrived, I of course always have an agenda printed out of how I want to explain what all the documents are and the contracts. And the senator's aide was very surprised that I wanted control of the meeting, and of course I did control the meeting. And I went through these documents with the governor's aide also being there. When I had exposed these documents, it's absolutely stunning what we had found in all of the contracts in Pennsylvania. The first thing that we found was this entire grant was to connect all the workforce data. It connects all the adults. It connects post-secondary children in college and community colleges. It links kindergarten. It links the Head Start. It links Early Learning Network. It also implements a data use policy for other people to access personally identifiable information. So page by page, and this is what the grant looked like. Okay, whoops, where am I? Here it is. This is what the grant looked like. And those are the numbers.
Connects with the NCES data standards, National Center for Education
Statistics grant.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what I showed them. The data system had to have remember when I said the standardization? Okay, this document says this is the vision for the state longitudinal study. They have to have the National Center of Education Statistics data elements, so all of the data collection is exactly the same. So if you're giving this same grant to every state in the United States, what does that mean? This is a national database that monitors the exact same thing in every state. So I went through that. It also says, and I'm quoting, our vision, and in Pennsylvania it's called the Pennsylvania Information Management System. So they call it something different in every state, but it's the data collection. Our vision is that this data collection is to become a critical tool to improve education and workforce outcomes for all Commonwealth children, designing a comprehensive K-12 data system, creating the solid foundation for a, quote, womb to workplace information data system. It says that they started out with race to the top money, okay? $4.35 billion was given to education from the Recovery Act. And this is the money that was used to create these data systems, a longitudinal data system in every state in the entire country, the entire state.
Can we get a list of the people who received these grants?
Yeah, I can send that to you.
That'd be great.
That was my Christmas gift. That was my Christmas gift to the nation.
Excellent.
In December. I gave everyone the link to their grant so that they could look to see how their state created a unique national ID. And that was on page, I think it's 18 of the grant, that says Pennsylvania will lead a collaborative effort to establish a national ID for every student. Not my words, their words.
Let me ask you this. Just
okay.
You and I sense this. We get it. But let me ask you. I just want to hear your version of the answer to this question, which is, what's so bad about a national identification system? I mean, we have passports and driver's licenses and social security numbers. That certainly narrows the field a little bit. What is the danger, in your opinion, of this national ID system?
Well, the national ID of what, like I said before, it's a psychometric data collection. Okay, so the problem is it's a decision-making project.
Protocol, okay? Yeah.
It's a decision. Now we have all of this information on you. Okay, let's say your child's in second grade, and they say your child has aggressive behavior because she kicked someone out on the playground. Okay? This is your decision-making model. Now they would target your child to go into what they call intervention services, and they call it positive behavior intervention and support, or they'll call it specialized support services for students, or they'll call it response to intervention. Okay? All of these are the mental health agendas. Now, if you can't say no, you cannot say no. Okay? This is the problem. What if they get to a point where they say that they can identify aggressive behavior when your child is born? And the government says, your child has aggressive behavior. We have to implement these drugs.
Yeah, it dovetails nicely into the designer babies.
Disagree? Okay, so it's the government objectives of what they want. And do parents have the right to say no? What happens in the future? I mean, I can't tell people what are going to happen in the future. What I can show them is what they are collecting, what the objectives are in mental health, what they will do in the end 5-10 years from now. I can't tell you. But I can tell you that they're collecting biometric data. I can tell you that this is a decision-making model. And okay, so they already have the third grade guarantee in many states, okay? Your child cannot move on beyond third grade without meeting the criteria for Common Core. So what do you do as a parent? You're going to go get a tutor, right?
That's when we lost you.
Okay, well, and this is the agenda. What happens is parents will try to do whatever they can to help their children. Okay, they call this parent engagement. And they'll stroke the parents into saying, well, this is what you need. But this is the criteria that's being set out. And as far as what will happen in the future, okay, well, you know what? The whole mental health agenda, and I want to go more into it from the grants perspective. Every time a child has an intervention. Okay, let's go back to Susie on the playground in the 2nd grade. Kicks someone on the playground. This child has aggressive behavior. Okay, this child will now have to go through what they call a functional behavioral assessment. So the teacher monitors this child on the playground, at school, when they go to the restroom, and they give little check marks. There are little check marks every time the child does something. Then they create this positive behavior intervention and support. So now they're going to create all of these different activities for your little Susie to comply. And they're all psychological, okay? So does the parent have a right to ever say no? Is this normal behavior? Now, what happens once that child is identified with a little check marks on their permanent record?
Yeah.
That is being coded under DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. What is this a setup for? To bill Medicaid. Our schools are being targeted to apply for partial hospitalization licenses to bill for Medicaid because of the mental health wraparound services.